Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a police! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as 4020, joining me for another week of NRL and Parramatta news with some signing stuff looking to ramp up. It's my good mate, Sixties, big fella. Eels poised to make a major, I'm not sure if you can call it a coup, but a major acquisition in the backline, and we'll get to that shortly. But as always, how you doing?
Really well, mate. Thanks for asking, and hopefully all our listeners are going great as well. Been absolutely loving watching training, as you can imagine, and that's probably where I think we will take some of the conversation tonight about what's been happening around the club, the vibe that's been happening there. So plenty to talk about. Looking forward to this podcast, mate. How you been going?
Yeah, all right. Plotting a few things out for November, December with family birthdays and whatnot, but it's getting closer and closer to that time of year as well. Christmas just around the corner, so all those sort of plans are starting to get into motion. But beyond that, yeah, not too bad, although the weather can't seem to make up its mind. It's hot and humid, then it's back to wintry and blustery, and everything in between, so sort of navigating that.
Yeah, well, even today was a strange one because it started off being really cool to the extent that when I was up at Kellyville and having a look at Eels training, I was thinking to myself, I should have worn a jacket up here. But then by sort of later in the day, it was a little bit muggy. So, yeah, a strange sort of day, mate. But just before we get on with the footy business, obviously, whatever platform that you're listening to this on, we really appreciate the like and subscribe. So please take the time to do that. Of course, a shout out and thanks to our sponsor, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Greg and the team there really appreciate their support. And it's also important to mention that voting closes for the resolutions in the Parramatta Leagues Club EGM. So it closes on Monday at 5 p.m. if you're voting electronically, or if you voted by post, it had to be in by then. I wouldn't try to vote by post now, but if you haven't voted, please make sure you get your votes in. We're voting against all of the resolutions. As has been well documented, Chris Barrett in his article talked about who the people are, or some of the people are, who are behind the resolutions. I mean, we're not even seeing, if they were trying to remove, for a start, directors who are doing an absolutely wonderful job, the Parramatta Leagues Club directors, and they're yet to name who, if they were removed, who would they put in their place. I mean, it's literally like saying, let's take out people who are doing a good job, and trust us, we've got some people who could do a better job. And you know what? We don't want to go back to the dark old days, nor do we even want to go to like just what seems like the least informed I've ever seen any sort of resolutions or anything to do with voting at the Leagues Club in memory. Like, I just can't even remember anything that's remotely like this. So, as I said, we've all voted against the 5 resolutions. We want to keep moving forward with Parramatta Leagues Club. We don't want to go back to the days where administrators had to be appointed. So let's keep the club moving forward. If you haven't voted, please make sure that you do get your vote in before Monday, 5 p.m. Okay, and John, I think that just about takes us to the point of Eels news.
News team, assemble!
And, of course, the big story as we are recording right now on Thursday evening is all of the media outlets that are reporting that Josh Addo-Carr signing with the Parramatta Eels is imminent. Now, this has been going on for some time in terms of the media coverage of this, the speculation. I think it's also been a case that, without question, Josh Addo-Carr fills a need within the Eels roster. And I think probably what's been going on up to this point has been all the due diligence stuff, the value of the contract, length of the contract, all those sorts of things. So I'm expecting that he will link with the club. The club hasn't come out and confirmed that it's going to take place. They haven't denied that they're talking with Josh Addo-Carr, but I think that it's probably going to take place. I think that connection with Jason Ryles in the past is puts this into the more likely than unlikely at this stage. John, he brings in that quality. If he does sign with the Eels, he brings in that quality of pace that you just can't coach into a player. You can maybe add all the refinements to get the optimum pace out of someone, but and fix up technique. But a player's either fast or they're not fast. And he's in the elite category when it comes to just natural speed.
Yeah, it was the mission statement from Jason Ryles, wasn't it? Sort of every off-season / pre-season roster movers gravitated around that core ideal of speed. And obviously there was a couple of other things too about, long-term viability of some of those legacy contracts. But, yeah, Addo-Carr on the field, slots into a position of need on the wing, brings pace. I've shared my concerns on and off the field of Addo-Carr in recent podcasts. I think he's had a history of injuries in the last couple of years that have sort of kept him from taking to the field with as much output as you would have liked. And then obviously off the field, there's the whole incident which led to him being terminated from Canterbury, which, look, it's not an egregious blight on his ability to play football, but I have voiced my issues with players like him and Mam taking liberties of other people's lives with those sort of actions. But yeah, from a pure footballing standpoint, it's a big positional need. It's a big philosophical need in terms of the speed in the backline. And you'd back Ryles to have insight into the character, into the cultural aspect of it, given their connections back to the Melbourne Storm. The big question now, putting aside any off-field concerns, injury concerns, all of which are now factors we're going to talk about, the monetary value. That's what's going to make or break this contract. The Daily Telegraph has described it as the Eels set to win bidding war for Addo-Carr. Is that sensationalized? Has that been editorialized or sensationalized in the headline? Because a player coming off a $550,000 contract, which is what was rumored to be at Canterbury, given that he was sacked for off-field incidents, you would hope that the Eels could squeeze some value out of it. I'm not expecting him to take a monster pay cut down to $250,000 a season, but you'd hope that the Eels could have shaved some value off that $550,000, given his age, the off-field indiscretion, the injury concerns. So if they got him for the right value, I think it's a good pickup.
Yeah, and look, it wouldn't be the first time that the Eels have taken a punt on a player who has had some issues and is looking for redemption. And Fergo, he was probably the most recent, but there've been players in the past that have proven that the past is the past. I think one of the most famous really was Manu Ma'u, for a start. Like he was a fine member of the Parramatta Eels community during his time there, and I mean that's probably a little bit more extreme in terms of, the background that Manu came from. But, obviously, if you're signing a contract with someone who's had some off-field issues, the likelihood is there would probably be clauses that would be included in any contract. I mean, we don't know this for sure, but you would assume that that's going to be part of the arrangement. And I think a player of Carr's seniority would realise that in this situation, for a start, he's going to back his own talent. He's never been a player to not back his own talent. He's not short on confidence for a start, but he'd also recognise that he's not so much in the driver's seat in this particular deal. I mean, he's not going to go cup in hand to a club and say, please give me a chance, because he's got too much talent to do that. But at the same time, he'd be recognising that the ball's firmly in his court for him to prove himself that a club signing him has made the right decision, and also to get any talk around him turn from being discussions about anything that's happening off field to everything about what's happening on field. And I'm sure that if that's what happens, if he signs a deal to come to the Eels, that'll probably be a priority for him, making it all about what happens on the field. So, looking forward to seeing what happens with that, because it's been like a mini soap opera on its own, hasn't it, trying to track what's been happening there. And that's so much rugby league these days.
The club has kept mum on the issue by and large, which has been to the club's credit, is something we've spoken about for a lot of Brad Arthur's tenure too, is that's been their modus operandi. They've kept the ship fairly tight, and that's the right way to operate. But yeah, that's one piece of the puzzle, isn't it? Because he slots immediately into the back line, which means you've got 3 of your 4, well, 5 if you want to count fullback as part of the back line, I suppose. You've got 3.5, I would say, of your backline positions locked in, because Will Penasini and Zach Lomax, they're your centres. Although I know there's a lot of conversation about Zach on the wing. He's confirmed he's playing centres, or centre, in the Eels, at least preliminary right now, which means Addo-Carr's on one wing, right or left. I believe he played left for the Dogs, but he might have played right in the past. He'll probably get first preference at what side he wants to play. Bowie Simonson obviously would be a front runner for the other spot pending fitness 60s, and we know he's he's rehabilitating that ACL. I think it was in club pictures today, which is good to see. And then I'll give the half a point to Isaiah Yongi at fullback, because I think he's going to be the front runner there. But you've also got Josh Papali'i as a long shot there, I suppose, or a backup. That last wing spot,
and you've also got Sean Russell there for a little bit.
Exactly, and that brings you to that the other options, which include Sean Russell, and then depth. Still a bit of an issue in terms of NRL experience then when you look at it, isn't it, 60s? Because you've got Jake Tungle, who's played a handful of NRL games as of season 2024. Obviously, Sean Russell's a very well-credentialed backup if he's going to be in that role for the team. He's obviously also be contending for that wing spot too. But then you're looking at some young guys we've mentioned in the past: Richard Penasini, Arthur Miller-Stephen. You've also got
Hayes Dunster,
correct. And if he can stay healthy, because we do have big raps on him, but he's had a bad run of injuries. Ethan Martin too could be in contention. So we certainly knock on wood there, because we love what we saw from Ethan this year when he was available. But there is a distinct lack of, like you're looking at Sean Russell and you're looking at Hayes Dunster as your 2 really NRL season guys, and unfortunately Hayes is still feeling the lingering effects of that catastrophic knee injury, and also just had some bad luck again this year. Whereas Sean Russell, I think, will be your prime backup option. So maybe there's a consideration for maybe another. It doesn't have to be another NRL option. Maybe Riles just says, you know what, we're going to go with young Penasini and Miller Stevens and Martin, and say whoever's the best man there will win the backup spot. But then the other piece of the puzzle, we could probably use another prop forward or middle forward, and certainly dummy half. And we've spoken about the dummy half we think that the connection to Newcastle is probably the option there. But then prop forward, if you have the resources, I don't know if there's. I mean, I don't know if we have the resources to consider someone like Terrell May alongside other considerations that we've spoken about.
I reckon we could put the line through Terrell May. I don't think the club's interested.
Yeah, well,
in Terrell May.
It wouldn't surprise me. Whenever there's concerns about motivation, it's clubs will be. It's funny because clubs put up with a lot. We're literally signing a player that's coming off field indiscretion, but motivation is you're out there to win games, aren't you? 60s, and motivation, and not just short term motivation, but having faith that someone's going to be motivated now and then again in 6 months or 18 months. It's a big part of the contractual obligation, the 2A contract, isn't it? And
it is.
And Terrell May is a phenomenally talented player, but and he may go on to another club and absolutely kill it. And I still don't think that would be the wrong decision from the club from where we look right now. Because obviously with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been easy to say, should have signed him. But the fact that the Roosters, who give a long leash to their players off the field, would release him because of concerns, well, supposedly around motivation, that is something you have to worry about. So, yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they do with the rest of the cap space for next year, 60s. But it looks like they've got one piece here in Addo-Carr, maybe another piece in Jaden Brayley. I don't know if they've got the opportunity for a third piece, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, as it stands, if Addo-Carr signs with the club, that would be 26 top 30 positions filled. They would need to sign 2 more
28 for the preseason mandate
before round 1. Yep. Now, I'm thinking that they are very serious about adding Brayley. And again, I think it would be coming down to the money side of it, because, as I've said before, Newcastle have been posturing about, they don't really want to let him go. And then I think there's even been, recent comments that, no, you know what, we're going to keep him there. So, as I said, I think there's been posturing, and it's all about what sort of freight that Newcastle have to keep paying him moving forward with any deal that he signs with another club. So there's that. John, I can see the argument about another prop, but I really think that in terms of the forwards that the Eels have got, I think we're probably still heavily weighted in the forwards, and that, if another position goes to a dummy half, for example, that it again takes away signing a backline player. And I think just in terms of depth, that it doesn't hurt to have another experienced NRL player that can be called on from a depth perspective. So I guess it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this pre-season plays out in terms of the roster. But talking about signing, John, there was some news that came out just a few days ago with the 3 of the 4 Australian Schoolboys players from this year that were with the Eels have signed on. So can you run us through what's happened there?
Yeah, Eels had 4 Australian Schoolboy representatives this year and have managed to hold on to 3 of them after Tyson Sanglang departed to the Penrith Panthers, which means that Lincoln Fletcher, who is a young halfback prospect who's also shown some pretty nifty positional versatility for the Australian Schoolboys, having played at a couple other roles in that team there, alongside Blazer's younger brother, Ryda Talagi, who's an outstanding young prop forward, and then Lachlan Coinakis, who is a lock forward turned dummy half, who's carved out a pretty handy niche in that number 9 jersey, have all inked extensions to the end of 2027, so next year's 25, then 26 and 27, so if you can do the maths, that's 3-year extensions for all 3 young players there. And yeah, can't really be upset by any of that, can't you, 60s, when you've got a trio of Australian schoolboys signing on, including a couple of spine positions and a great young prop forward. So well done to the club. I know that there was legitimate concerns about Ryda joining his older brother in Penrith, and the Panthers sort of work around a potential package deal for the Talagis. But I think keeping Ryda is a really nice coup. He is a big, mobile, fast prop forward, and then Lincoln and Lachlan are also very talented in their own right.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great news. I would expect that all three players start next season in SG ball.
Yes, I think Lincoln is eligible for Matthews, though, isn't he? He was a first-year Mats player, or was that his first-year senior representation?
I think that might have been his first year.
First year, but second, but in his second year of eligibility,
yes,
window.
yeah.
So if that's the case, then all three will start SG ball absolutely, and I could see at minimum. It's always hard to guess because sometimes the club can be very aggressive with development. But I could see Ryder and Lachlan. Well, I think Lachlan will probably play flag for sure. It just depends how deep the stocks are for Ryder and Lincoln as well, because there should be a few players there from last year backing up, plus other external recruitment. Because I do note that there is this isn't on the run sheet, but one of the media branches put out their sort of pathways players to watch this year, and we've recruited from a couple of different clubs. So notable acquisitions for the Harold Matthews 60s, which this is a bit tangential to what we're talking about, but Cordell Pritchard, who comes to us from St. George as a centre, but he's also played fullback at Parramatta, I believe. So a bit of positional versatility there. You've got Strantz Schmalkel, who comes from us from the West Tigers and was a middle forward there. And then in the Elisa Fiola, any external recruits, we have Ire Sevilla, who comes to us from the Sydney Roosters and plays in the back line between fullback and the outside back. So, again, positional versatility. And then we have Katia Duff, who comes to us from the Rabbitohs, who had a very good schoolgirls cup with Hill Sports High, played lock forward, so a middle forward there. SG Ball, we have Jaden Carter, who comes to us from Penrith, who will be vying for the fullback role. And then Cameron Bamblett, who's also from Penrith, who will be working in the halves, presumably for Lincoln Fletcher.
Relation to Talara?
Yeah, that's a very good shout, because
I think Talara's from the...
Is from that catchment as well, so perhaps that'd be a pretty cool family connection there. We'll have to do some poking around on that one there.
I'm making an assumption here without really having time to dig into that, but I'm not going to be surprised if they're brother and sister.
We'll have to ask around for sure. And then into Natasha Gale, we've got Chloe Beasley, who was a South Sydney Rabbitoh and is a winger. Then they're all returning players after that one there. So there's some competition there for our boys in the Australian Schoolboys there in the SG Ball competition, players to play alongside of, who will also shape the SG Ball squad and then potentially their flag squads later in the season. So yeah, it looks like the club's been doing some work there, which is good to see, because as much as Parramatta is a huge catchment, I mean, we've literally just seen the Penrith Panthers poach two of our juniors in Tyson Sangalang and obviously Blaze Talagi. So even if you've got a huge catchment, doesn't preclude you from doing that sort of roster augmentation, which we're very big on because you want to develop and sign. So some interesting roster news there. And in terms of those schoolboys, very exciting for the upcoming rep campaign 60s, because we just got the summer squads. We talked about that last podcast. Lots of familiar names, lots of new names, some legacy names there too. And you talk about all the new players coming in from other clubs, and the club's been busy, and it's always fun watching the pathways to give yourself an idea of where the club is at, and the sort of trickle-on effect to competition like the Jersey Flag.
And, of course, we normally get the first junior representative trial game happening in December as well. So normally a one trial game in December, two trial games in January in the lead up to the start of the junior rep season. So looking forward to those, John. We try to get to as many of the junior rep trial matches as we can before we commence our full-time coverage of the Parramatta Eels junior representative season. But so we'll try and get some of those like dates and venues of their trials. Okay, mate. Just turning our attention to Eels NRL training, we had. First of all, a shout out to everyone who's been reading the training reports. We continue to get quite incredible numbers with our site visits to the Cumberland Throw. The training reports are always popular at this time of year, but it's been some really big reading numbers that are coming in with those. So thank you to everyone who takes the time to read them. Thank you especially also to those people who take the time to leave a comment or reply. Really do appreciate that. And we had the NRL players return yesterday, Wednesday. That was their day one. So everyone except for Mitch Moses, Zach Lomax, and Isaiah Iongi have returned. That's what it appears to be, just having a look at the players out there on the field. I've tried to do a count and tried to tick off all the players that are there. I hadn't quite been able to see Jermaine Hopgood.
He's there. He's in the gallery.
But he is there. He is there. Yeah. Saw him there today. I haven't compiled today's report as yet. I'm thinking that I might put it into a double report with Thursday and Friday together. But I can't wait to try to write up the drill, the part of the warm-up today would have been the most fun that I've seen a team have during a training session, during the warm-up of a training session. They played a game which was an absolute crack-up to watch. Lots of fun. I can tell you that the laughter was echoing around the grounds as they were playing it, and when it wrapped up, the players burst out into applause for the game that was played. Well, the games, because there were a couple of games on the field next to each other, so there was a couple of games happening simultaneously. But it absolutely looked like a ball of fun. So I'll try and describe what was happening in the training report. What I'm seeing, John, is a really good vibe there at training. Coming, obviously, lots of new faces with the young players that are there, and although some of them have obviously been around the group before, there's some new players that have come in, but it's with so many the new faces really are there on the coaching staff as well. So there was always going to be an unknown for the players coming in, what to expect, and what I'm seeing so far is players that seem to be enjoying what they're doing. It's not that there wasn't enjoyment before or anything like that, far from it. But what I can report is it's a really, really good positive vibe to start the year. And it's a long pre-season, as everyone knows. So it's good to start off on such a positive foot there. Also mentioned that at the start of this week, Blair Mills, who's the head of athletic performance, came over and introduced himself, and we had a bit of a chat about his background and some of the things that we can expect to see during pre-season training around conditioning, that sort of thing. Now, rather than have a bit of a spoiler in talking about it now, I will be reporting on what happens in the training reports, and maybe people can try to work out what is taking place in the conditioning space in Eels pre-season. So I'll just leave it at that. I guess hit the training reports for any details, and I think we'll move on, mate, because there was also something to report from yesterday, which was there was an Eels function that was held on Wednesday night in Alex & Co restaurant in Parramatta, in Eat Street in Parramatta. Very good function to be at and to mix with some of the people that were there. So it was a lot of people in the business community in the Parramatta area. There was local council representation. There was James Hardy, people that were there, and obviously Parramatta Leagues Club board of directors and CEO Chris Demu. There was Parramatta Eels directors there, and importantly, there was Jason Riles and Nathan Brown, and they were asked some questions about how they came to be at Parramatta, what some of their goals are in terms of, with the player development, those sorts of things. The interesting thing I found with Jason Riles is how much he's embracing the Parramatta heritage and making that important. So, I mean, obviously there's the business of football, which comes first. And obviously as well, you don't live in the past. But what he seems to be doing is to embrace the Eels identity and to make the Eels identity a core element of what happens in and around the football team. And I think that's really, really important. And there'll be things that supporters will come to learn about that, what's happening in the way of the Eels identity. I'm not going to do any sort of spoiler in talking about it here and now, because I think it's important that when this is communicated, that it's communicated by Jason Riles himself. And I'm sure as the pre-season unfolds, as the year unfolds, supporters will come to learn about that. But you've already seen the vision of Peter Sterling being up at Eels HQ, heading off with Jason Riles to have a tour of how the construction of the Centre of Excellence is coming along. So there are people who are getting involved with the club, like Peter Sterling. And again, it's not coming in and telling the club what to do, but, Jason's spent a bit of time, and this is something that there has been some media coverage. He spent some time having lunch with some of the past players, spending time with Sterlo, spending time with Mick Cronin, and it's really, and what he's talked about, what he talked about last night was how obvious it was to him that the success of the Parramatta Eels is still a priority for all these former players, that, their investment in the club and how the club is continues to this day. They weren't players who then just stopped being passionate about the club. It continues to this day. And that's been part of that learning process as well, I think, for Jason Riles, just finding out how connected these players remain to the Parramatta Eels as well. Nathan Brown gave an interesting answer when he was asked about, is there any particular player that's already impressed him, either in his time talking with them, if they hadn't commenced training, or in how he's dealt with them so far in the training that's happened. And he said that it was really what lies ahead with those players that he's most looking forward to, the players who embrace the learning and the development that can take place at the Eels moving forward. And I thought that was a really, really good response to that question, because, I mean, it's still early days, and really it's about, are there players that are going to take their game to the next level, whether they're an experienced player or not. And that's where his head's at in terms of the players and the playing group. Who's going to step up and take their game to that next level? Who's going to embrace learning and change and all of that comes with it? So, that was very, very good. We did hear from the mayor of Parramatta, Martin Zeta, who's a passionate Parramatta supporter. Jim Sarantinos spoke as well about the club and the centre of excellence, everything that's coming along there. We heard from the president of James Hardie, the Pacific region president, John Arneil, who, like so many people involved with James Hardie, is a passionate Parramatta supporter. I got spent a bit of time chatting with John last night. So, John, if you're listening, thank you for your time last night. And he was an entertaining fellow to speak to, and as I said, a really, really passionate Parramatta man. Also, was able to spend a bit of time talking to one of the new Eels football directors, John Forrester. And again, a bloke who brings a lot of skills to the board, and, important skills in commercial property, and what happens with commercial properties. And also, it just happens a passionate Parramatta supporter who grew up at North Rocks and was talking to me about, the Cumberland Oval and the getting along and seeing Parramatta like over the years. And look, I really enjoyed last night being able to meet some people that I hadn't met before, and just finding out just the level of passion and support that exists in government and in business out there as well. So there's a lot of positivity about the club moving forward. And I think as we move into this next 12 months, John, that we're going to see some real massive steps forward, both on and off the field at the club. I think there is a real positivity about what's going on, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all unfolds. So really appreciate being at the event, and thank you to all those people who came and introduced themselves to me, or that I had an opportunity to speak with. It was it was a terrific night. John, just on, again, more events for Parramatta supporters, and this time there's the member appreciation event that's just been announced. I'll let you run through the details of that.
Yeah, not to be confused with the open training session out at Fairfield Showgrounds. They have announced that there's Member Appreciation Day at Eric Twiddell Stadium. This one is for all 2025 members, and it takes place on Saturday, December 14. So it kicks off at 9 o'clock a.m., runs to 1 o'clock p.m. Eric Twiddell Stadium, for those who are familiar or unfamiliar, it's the has been the home of our Pathways and NRLW squads for the last year and a bit. It's a fantastic little venue, and it's getting better and better. So limited parking will be available on site at the stadium. I would not, if you're going, I would not bank on parking at the stadium 60s. As frequent as Eric Twiddell Stadium, if you get inside that car park on any sort of event day, you have won a lottery ticket and you've wasted all your luck there. But you can park on side streets and around the park, the greater council park itself. So I'd probably count on that more so. So you need to be a current member to attend. But it kicks off at 9:15 a.m. for an open training session. Get to watch all the Eels in action. This runs until 11:15, and gives a chance to see how the Eels are shaping up after a couple of it'd be a month and a bit, wouldn't it? 60s for most of the players at that point there. Also going to be special
It'd
appearances.
be very, very. It'd be
They're
very
going to,
close.
yeah, they're going to be, yes, right in the middle of their athletic throws with the new conditioning staff getting their hooks into them. But there'll also be NRLW.
And also, mate, it might. I reckon it's going to be right around the time where maybe Moses and Lomax.
True, they're just it's going to be just before that pre-Christmas run there, where they get maybe 2 weeks of the squad before getting the Christmas break because of their greater representative commitments for Australia. Likewise for Isaiah Yongi too, who I don't know if he'll be back a little bit early because he didn't play, but consider that as well. But also be NRLW players in attendance, so you'd probably think the Kennedy sisters will be there, and they're always a fantastic chat too if you can have a chance to get a chin waggle going there. There'll be a signing session, but there is a restriction. Make sure it's one item per person because I want to try and get everyone there in attendance to have a fair go at getting something signed. And player availability is going to be rotating and subject to change, I believe. So on top of that, there's going to be inflatable stuff for the kids, jumping castles and whatnot, face painting food trucks, raffles. There's going to be some partner activations, which means sponsors working with the club to offer some promotions to members, as well as a merchandise fan if you want to pick up the latest 2025 Eels kit. So I'm not sure if you need to put an expression of interest in. No, I don't think you do. You do?
Yeah, yes, there is. Yes. So there's a link to say that you'd be attending. So if you head to your emails, it should be there. And I think that's as much about trying to work out the numbers.
Yeah, logistics on the club side.
Or logistics. Yeah, because you could get anywhere between, 1 and say 4,000 people there, depending on
we bit of difference between trying to cater for 1,000 people and 4,000 to 5,000 people.
Yeah, and look, it's a venue which can probably hold 4,000 to 5,000 people in there, but it would be quite full and quite busy with that. And look, I want to emphasise as well that one signing item per person as well. Anyone that's been to Eels meet the player sort of open training events or signing sessions like that knows that if you end up in long queues for signing, that it can be frustrating because the players are there for a certain period of time, and when that time is up, they have to go because they'll have other commitments and what have you, and then the ground is hired for a particular length of time. There's a whole lot of logistical stuff around that people need to understand, and what makes it happen a lot smoother is if people aren't handing over a whole lot of stuff to each person to get signed. You got time for the quickest chat, get something signed, and then the next person gets their opportunity as well. And I think that's when you have, everyone looks forward to meeting their favourite players, and that's it's important to have these opportunities, but also, if you see that there's really long queues that are there, just remember you've got someone that's behind you as well that and might be a long way behind you in the line. And let's try to make sure that everyone gets as much as an opportunity as everyone else. So, but that should be a great day. It's a really good opportunity for the kids to meet some of their favourite players as well. So, John, that just about wraps up our Eels news. So I'm throwing it over to you for our musical interlude.
Yeah, we've had some longer interludes in recent weeks, so decided to switch things up, make it a little bit shorter, and I suppose in honour of our expected imminent NRL signing, make things a little bit sweet as well.
Mate, that was one sweet musical interlude.
Yes, of course.
I like it. In all honesty, that is one of my favourite tracks from back in the day. Sweet were a guilty pleasure, absolutely, because the commercially great stuff that they came out with back in the 70s, Ballroom Blitz, Fox on the Run.
Another cracking song, the Ballroom Blitz, yeah.
Yeah, Love Is Like Oxygen. And I guess they were almost regarded as a bit of bubblegum pop rock as well. But mate, what a cracking song to have there! It's great musical interlude. We've been talking. You and I have been talking about how we're going to dabble in maybe doing a bit of live Facebook for our podcasts and putting our ugly mugs up on the screen for the podcast. Maybe not every one, but with some selected podcasts. I'm glad I wasn't live while that song was on, because I think that people might have ended up with screenshots that they would have taken that would have made me look like a goose forever as I was rocking along with the suite there. So, mate, yeah, and I think we've got a theme song for Josh Addo-Carr if he does.
It's that, or What Does the Fox Say? Which, when we have a goofier segment for Addo-Carr, I'm sure we can bring up What Does the Fox Say?
Oh, no.
Whenever he gives us a quotable soundbite, what does the fox say? And you just cut to the soundbite,
Well, I guess we've got to come up with the new opening to the podcast, don't we? Because we've got all the sound bites of
I've been canvassing
Micah Steve-O and Edge.
If anyone's got recommendations, send them in, because I've been canvassing commentary stuff for players to sort of put in there. So if we get any recommendations, I will take them on board.
Well, look, it might be temporary as all of the new additions to the Eels team join and then have their moments that are captured in commentary, so that it can be a work in progress. But yes, we do have to retool the opening credits. So something to work towards. Okay, NRL news time. John, Ezra Mam. It gets worse.
Yeah, well, it gets worse, but not as bad as it could have been, I suppose, for Ezra, with charges officially being laid towards the Brisbane Broncos young playmaker. What do they end up selling on here? Where's my article? It's down here. So he's set to miss 12 rounds is the sort of tentative punishment coming out via the media, which, if you've been listening to the podcast, I think that's incredibly light. But he's being charged with drug driving, so a branch of DUI. And on top of that, he's got a couple other minor charges, but nothing like I don't know if it's assault causing actual body harm when you're in a vehicle, but there's a vehicular equivalent of that. And he's gotten an array of relatively minor charges, honestly. So, like you said, it's gotten worse for him, but it could have been even worse from that. So, still have to wait and see if more charges come out the play. There's been some speculation online from, the discussion that the prosecution are just waiting and maybe end up pushing more charges to the docket. But from my perspective, he got out pretty light. At least as it stands right now, he's gotten out pretty light. And especially if it's only a 12-week suspension.
Yeah, well, I guess that might yet be a story in progress for what happens there. On the injury front, mate, Penrith, look, I guess they've got time to get over their injuries, but both Dylan Edwards and Blaze Talagi could be in doubt for the season opener.
Racing the clock for round one. Maybe even a few weeks beyond that. Got both of them with shoulder injuries. And I don't think has it been specified exactly what the nature of them are there. Let's have a quick gander again. So it's so Blazers is a latterjet reconstruction, I'm not a shoulder specialist, so I couldn't tell you what a ladder jet eventuates, but it's a recommended 4-month recovery time, which puts him in doubt for round 1 because that's 15 weeks away, and 4 months is a bit more than 16 weeks. So, on top,
and I also think as well that as he's a new addition to the club, and the pre-season,
he was going to be a huge beneficiary of a pre-season Penrith, and that's going to put him well behind the 8 ball. Shoulder injury, you're not going to be able to do any sort of pre-season. I mean, you can sit on the bike. That's about it. So he's not going to be doing anything.
I think we can lock in that when he comes back, that he'll spend a period of time in New South Wales Cup. I guess getting match fitness, getting used to Panthers systems before they throw him into the deep end. You can't imagine that he would go into first grade at the Panthers after going through rehab for injury and being new to the club and just getting slotted in there. You would imagine that they will show a lot of patience with him, I think. They'll give him time to find his feet. And I think that's probably the right way around it. And I'm sure even with Parramatta this year and Blaze had great moments in attack, especially from the time that he came into the team. But it probably wasn't in the plan that he was used so early in the season.
Yeah.
And I think that Penrith will probably hasten slowly with that.
It's
so
the same situation for Dylan Edwards, a ladder jet reconstruction. So he'll be on the same timeline as Blaze. The only difference is that Dylan Edwards is highly credentialed and experienced fullback coming off an international campaign with the Kangaroos and 4 premiership wins with the Panthers. So he'll be rushed back into first grade with as little conditioning work as needed, essentially.
John, how do you spell that? How do you spell that injury?
LATARJET. So LATARJET, ladder jet. Yeah.
Is that all one word?
Yeah, one word. Yes.
I've never heard of it before.
No,
it's
I've never heard of a shoulder reconstruction being referred to as ladder jet, but in medical circles, obviously it's been called that for forever. But it's probably just been something that's been adopted by the sort of Twitter sphere of physios and fans of the game there. So it essentially
reminds me of Liz
Frank fractures exactly in the foot. Yeah,
never heard of the Liz Frank fracture.
Say about syndesmosis?
2-3 years ago, and now it's like the sprained ankle with the syndesmosis.
High ankle sprain or suddenly syndesmosis out of nowhere. It's sort of like it's some sort of flow-on effect from whatever branch of medical / sporting intersection leads towards that normalising. So ladder jet seems to be an open stabilisation of the shoulder. So there's been some bone damage via dislocation. So there you go. I'm sure if there's any medical, whether you're a physio or a doctor or a nurse, listeners here, you can chime in the comments and provide some clarification. But looks to be a 4-month timeline for both Dylan Edwards and Blaze Talagi out at Penrith. So I'm sure they're going to be just fine, given that they've managed to navigate times without Nathan Cleary alongside other players. But it will lead to a slower start than maybe expected for the Penrith Panthers.
Well, I'm sure that a friend of TCT NRL physio will probably at some point come out with explanations about these sorts of injuries. So anyone that doesn't follow NRL physio, you're doing yourself a disservice. So make sure you give him a follow. Roosters and Ben Hunt, mate. Is this a marriage that's about to happen? I mean, the Roosters, for once it's a whole lot of shedding of players.
Well, normally you roll your eyes when the Roosters are linked to a major free agent, wouldn't you? It's like, how are they going to fit him in under the salary cap? The old Roosters sombrero coming out to play. But given who's departed from the Roosters this year, it's more of a case of, that actually kind of makes sense.
Well, mate, there's a part of me that thinks they're going to make some sort of big play in the market at some point, and probably at some point soon, because
I would rather it was
way too quiet.
Yeah.
It's way too quiet. So are they are they looking at getting, someone back that's recently departed when they
exactly. Joe, there's all sorts of talk from the main game that the main body, that Manu, can't be a mercenary, but it happened with Sonny Bill. It'll happen with Manu. I think that we should expect to see Manu back in tricolours, but with the caveat that they'll be able to pro rata scale his contract to a smaller amount because of the reduced output he'll have in a season, which is why as a Eels fan, I'd rather the Roosters be spending money on Ben Hunt than elsewhere, because Ben Hunt, he's a known commodity. He's not you can make an argument that he'd be great for the Eels at dummy half, but the reality is he's not going to play dummy half for Parramatta. So he is not in a position of need for us. Let the Roosters spend the resources on him and not compete with us in other signings.
And so is he going to go there?
Well,
what's your take?
Danny Weidler's latest as of a couple of hours ago was that he's going to meet, he being Ben Hunt, sorry, not Danny Weidler, will be meeting with the Broncos within the next 48 hours while the Roosters still remain very much in the hunt. But I don't know. He's got a very clear spot in the halves at the Roosters because Sandon Smith. The Roosters were bullish on Sandon Smith. I don't think he's their guy. Maybe he is more time, but I expect Hunt to go in there, slot in at number 7 while Sam Walker recovers, and then eventually partner Walker in that hypothetical. Whereas in Brisbane, it's a little bit less straightforward, isn't it? Because the Ezra Mam situation's there, which means he's going to be rubbed out for, we're looking, as we spoke earlier, around 12 weeks. So in that window, it's very straightforward. It's Hunt plus Reynolds, even though they're very much a similar player. So does that work from a partnership standpoint? Maybe. They're both, dominant on the ball halves that want to be the focal point of distribution. Hunt could probably model his game to be a little bit more run heavy and defer to Reynolds. But beyond that, does Hunt then slide the dummy half position that while he's very good at, he is very vocal about not wanting to play dummy half. I think the Roosters make a lot more sense. He's been set up in New South Wales for years now. If he really wants to go back to Brisbane, obviously it's a different factor, and that's going to be a huge tipping point in their side of the scales. But I think Ben Hunt to the Roosters makes a lot of sense, and financially they've certainly got the means to sign him without anyone having to crack any salary cap jokes this time around.
John, just on the topic of the Roosters, and it's not something that we wrote down to cover in our run sheet, but is Trent Robinson a coach who'll be under the microscope or under pressure going into 2025? Have the Roosters underperformed since they last won the premiership?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a conversation to be had there. I wouldn't say he's on the hot seat. I think that he's accrued an enormous hoard of good faith to be banked upon for the Tricolours, and that's going to see him through another Finn season or maybe 2. But I don't think it's unfair to suggest that they have underperformed it since, 2019 was their last title? Is that right? Because then it was Melbourne, Penrith, right? Penrith, sorry, 4 times. And there's been, we saw this year that they were rocked by injuries, and they've had some bad luck here and there, but the strength of it, even with all those injuries, 60s, you looked at the roster they were putting out compared to most other presumed contenders outside of Penrith and Melbourne, and it still dwarfed other teams in talent. That is how rich the Roosters have been on the field. So, I think there is a case to be had that maybe it should not be considered, given that he is the long-term coach of the Roosters. They are a franchise that has a high standard, and it would be cutting them to pieces that they have been on the outside looking in for the grand final 5 years running.
Yeah, I think it might be a case of watch this space, because I honestly think they have to go top 4 this coming season and look like they're competing for the title. Because, look, how long has he been there for now?
Trent Robinson.
He 2012 or something like that.
No, maybe it's more than 2015. You're right.
I think it's about 2012.
I will tell you that it was 2013. So 1 year on from where you set it at. Was that Le Catalans for the preceding 2 years, and then Toulouse before that. So he's been at the Roosters for over a decade now. And, we just saw Brad Arthur moved on. And look, Trent's had far more success than Brad, winning a couple of titles there at the Roosters. But tenure only carries you so far in the NRL, doesn't it, mate? You got to keep producing results. And what Brad Arthur was the victim of the Penrith dynasty as much as any other coach in the NRL, but unfortunately, at the end of the day, you didn't get the result, the big premiership ring. It just stacks up that pressure. And Trent's had a better roster than the Eels have had at any point there, even during our 2022 run. I think it's not. I don't think it's unfair, to suggest that he should there should be a conversation around his future. But it's going to be interesting to see how they react this year on the field, having a big exodus of talent. Maybe they get Manu back midway through the season. If they get Ben Hunt, that gives them some seniority in the playmaking position. But they're going to, given who they've lost and given other roster issues around Brandon Smith and whatnot, they look as mortal as any club going around in the midfield at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I think we watch this space because, you can imagine I think I'd have a fair idea about what would happen if they didn't make finals football. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see what unfolds there. We go from top of the table stuff to bottom of the table stuff. The Tigers, and they've handed out some breach notices, mate.
Yeah, Benji Marshall, looking to set standards in the pre-season, has handed out the old 5 breach notices there. No players named officially, but holding his players to high standards, and it's not direct public humiliation, but it falls short of name and shame. But those players would be stinging of it, wouldn't they? Being subject to unofficially, they know who they are, but unofficially they're now the butt of all those jokes that you're not even good enough for the West Tigers preseason.
Well, here's what would probably happen is that their teammates may well know who it is.
You know who's struggling when you're in the preseason, exactly.
And at some point, it's going to come out who it is. So if I was to guess, my guess would be, if I'm being really cynical, that those players would be players that the Tigers would be happy to move on.
Look in the shop, yep.
And, so... but it's why is that out? How did it get? How was that out there?
That is something that should stay in house, isn't it? Or just
Yeah.
Like, I'm all for the Tigers trying to hold players to standards in the preseason. That is absolutely a mandate that as an NRL club you should be looking to enforce on your players. But all you do is subject yourself to ridicule by letting it be known that 1/6 of your top 30 are not up to NRL standards right now. So, yeah, a bit of a faux pas there from the Tigers or whoever ended up leaking it. It'll be interesting to see if players' names end up coming out. Things like that tend to have a habit of squeaking out eventually. But I'm honestly not even that interested in it. It's more West Tigers shoot themselves in the foot. And like you said, it's more likely than not, far more likely than not, that it's going to be 5 players that they're trying to move on. And you look at that roster and there are some guys that jump out. They've been, I don't know if these are the players that are, failing the things, but Jaden Sullivan and John Bateman have been very publicly linked with not being wanted there. You've got some older players like Dave Clemmer. You got there's young players too that might not be up to the standards of the NRL preseason. We've seen that at Parramatta. Young guys don't know what's coming for them, and they sort of take it a little bit lightly and get caught at the back of the pack. So there's a few different candidates there, but like you, I tend to think that it's probably going to be players that are looking to move on, and this is part of the process, even though it didn't need to be made public, of getting them on a move on.
Yeah, and if that's what they're doing, I'd say shame on them for going down that path. Now, if we stay on the path of rugby league stupidity, let's talk this proposed rule change that came up about eliminating the longer kickoff, or not eliminating, but penalising any kickoff that landed beyond the 20-metre line. John, I'm there's almost a part of me that I can't even begin to describe how stupid, just idiotic such a decision would be if they went down that path. I mean, you're talking about we're all for making sure that the game is safer for players, especially with issues around concussion and the long-term effects of concussion or repeated concussion to players. But there are a lot of other paths that they could take before talking about making a shorter kickoff to keep players safe from a few what they think could be big collisions in a game. And, I mean, look, if you're that worried about a tackle from a player charging the ball up, put on the waistband and add the tags on the side. Seriously.
Yeah, this discussion's taken place in the NFL. It's taken place in the NRL prior to what we're talking about now at the kickoff, is that player safety is obviously at the highest of high priorities. But at some point, there's also just an understanding that you're playing an aggressive contact sport. And part of that, includes a risk that you have to accept. And that comes with huge financial compensation. Just like working in the mines is a far above average paycheck for anyone that does that job, but it comes with its own risks. This change, and I don't know if it's cynical of me to say that it's been shrouded in the guise of player welfare for the sake of more attacking football, but that's what it feels like. Is that we saw the change this season past of 10-metre restarts no longer being penalised the way they were before with a penalty. It's now just to play the ball if the ball travels in the touch or fails to go 10. If it's deemed to be contestable, which was the way they deemed contestable was a laughable framework as well. This feels like an extension of that to try and get more attacking football into the game rather than worrying about player safety. And the idea that was seriously being considered that a kick that travels beyond the 20-metre mark into what has always been the conventional reception area on the goal line would yield a 7 tackle. We talk about how devastating 7 tackle sets are in general and how much the game would need to or should be considering a more refined process of how to award 7 tackle sets. Like, why is a knock on in goals when you're trying to score a try the same as booting the ball dead from your own 30-metre mark, which is what the original intention of a 7 tackle set was, to stop fullbacks like Slater, Inglis and Hayne getting taken out of the game by negative kicks or clearing kicks. That was the entire point of a 7 tackle set. We're so far from that now. To give the idea of giving a 7 tackle set from a kickoff for a conventional kickoff is beyond psychotic. And like I said, the cynic in me believes it's been done under the guise of player safety, but more so to try and introduce more attacking football, having contested kickoffs every time. It's worth noting that this was the framework in which it was presented was supposedly under kickoffs only, but then why doesn't that extend the dropouts? Why is kicking a dropout 50 metres fine? So why don't you get a 7 tackle attacking set on the goal line then? So thankfully this has been at least poo-pooed away, shoo-shooed away for 12 months, maybe perhaps based on the widespread and almost derisive criticism that's come out from fans, and understandably so. I didn't see a single proponent of this among the wider pundits in the game, and thank goodness that everyone was unified in this, because what a brain-dead proposal. Like I said, the cynic in me thinks that it's player welfare as a veneer only. I just can't. I like... You've heard me, Sixties, even before the game sort of moved towards the metagame of short dropouts, I was a big proponent of short dropouts. I think that attacking restarts have a huge place in this game, but not as a... It should be a choice for the club, for any given team, right? It should not be, a sort of choke job, strangle job forcing you to do a short dropout or a short restart every time. And while I tend to lean towards a short dropout almost every time, I think that the game theory behind that almost always works out. Even when although there are some considerations for field goals and whatnot that I think maybe warrant considering going long, as well as using the long kickoff or long dropout as now a surprise mix-up, funnily enough. I think that the actual conventional kickoff, there are very few circumstances in a neutral game setting where I would be warranted. I'd be pushing for it, because rugby league is already a unique game in that the scoring team gets possession back, or gets presumed possession back with a conventional kickoff. And yes, you can go short, and when you're chasing points or trying to get back in the game, you go short. But if you're forced to go short every time, the territorial swings are too volatile in my books. And I'm a big fan of at least the long kickoff being the norm rather than the mix-up option.
Yeah, and look, you raised a valid point with regard to the long dropout, because I think you'd see that there's probably some of the bigger collisions. From
people
the
wind up off
line
dropouts way more than kickoffs, and people wind up off kickoffs. Don't get me wrong, but the dropout seems to, for whatever reason, get people far more amped up, or the prop forwards far more amped up. And I suppose the big thing there is that teams are, as we just discussed, teams have already navigated or moved towards consistently executing a short dropout as opposed to long dropouts. Maybe that's less of a concern for the governing body, but yeah, that we are tinkering with the rules so often in this game when there are things that we could be looking to fix, and there's a lot of gripes that rugby league fans will be pointing out that something is wrong here or something is wrong there, and I think there's definitely arguments for a lot of things, but we're just changing rules for the sake of changing rules. And yeah, we're in the 6 again era of football, but 6 against only happen in certain parts of the field. It's apparently in other parts of the field. Like, where's the rhyme or reason there? Just let us go a season. And I suppose with this now being knocked down, are there any other major rule changes that have been announced yet? If this has been knocked down, then maybe we will get a year-to-year bit of consistency. But we don't need to be changing rules, if at all.
No,
year-to-year, let alone at all.
We don't. It almost feels like rules committees need a reason to exist.
Yeah, that is a classic part of bureaucracy, isn't it? A committee justifying its need for existence. If we're talking about rules and they always talk about bringing fatigue into the game, that's probably the one area we could look at. Make the players play 80 minutes. If the ball is dead, the clock is dead. That's the big rule change I would argue for, since they got rid of the kicking for the sideline for scrums to control the tempo of the game. At this point, why don't you just get players to play 80 minutes? That's the big rule change I would consider, beyond anything that would talk about player safety. Obviously, if there's any wrestling techniques developed or whatnot that need to be addressed, they're the little spot fires you need to be aggressive with, and they're things that are usually codified already in the rulebook that just need further clarification when a team finds a little bit of grey space to manipulate. But no 7 tackle kickoffs. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and look, the crazy thing is with that, John, anyway, because the rule they were talking about was a kick that goes past the 20-metre line on the full. Teams that wanted a long kickoff will just practice driving
grub,
that
like monster squib drubbers, and find lines to get there.
And then they end up with the exact same scenario where a team's taken the ball in their 20-metre area and someone's having a bit of a run up into the defence line. It'd be no different. I don't think it would be a scenario that would drive teams to necessarily go for the short drop out a little bit more. I think the teams that like the long kickoff would have just opted for a different style of kick to get it there. And then what are they going to do? Are they going to mandate and say no kickers allowed to go past the 20-metre line? No, they couldn't do that. They couldn't suddenly turn the 20-metre line into like a dead ball line for kickoffs. It'd be, that sort of thing is ridiculous. So
the
anyway,
funny part is that every rule change is essentially made to make the game faster and more attacking orientated, and yet the Penrith Panthers and Melbourne Storm are consistently dominating the game on the back of solid defense and extreme fitness. Yes, they attack well, but as much as the powers that be want the game to be, and they're not alone in this, the NFL, the NBA, all these other major codes, whatever their focus groups and their testing and whatever other metrics they use that tell them that the fans want more attack, teams consistently want defense. And it's just this weird arm wrestle where the powers that be, and fans like tries, but if I go to a game and it's a 14-10 cracker, I am way more entertained than like our win against St. George Sixties was one of the worst games we'd seen in a long time, wasn't it? Because 100 points were scored, but no one left feeling like a winner. And that's the sort of end game from all this stuff when you start just promoting attack, and time possession starts getting lopsided and the territorial advantage just swings so wildly. Just let the teams play good football. Like, let them have an actual structure of rules that flows on year to year so that the metagame can properly develop. And there's always going to be teams exploiting the onside and the rest. That's on the referees. Like, the referees and the governing body in that regard are as much culprits of the wrestle and those sort of tactics, because in the rule book there are all sorts of mandates to penalise that stuff. Just they let the teams get away with it and it gets out of control. Yeah,
agree entirely. Well, mate, I think it's just about time to wrap things up, and we'll do so by looking at the finals of the Pacific Championships. And can I just say, first of all, I didn't get out to the game at CommBank Stadium. However, I wanted to be part of the atmosphere that was there.
Well, if you're in Parramatta, you got to taste of the
Parramatta. I went into Parramatta. I went for a drive past the stadium, and I have never seen scenes quite so colourful around the stadium in some time, mainly because of just the noise that was being generated. I tell you what, maybe I can say that I have, because in the year that we made the grand final in 2022, it was pretty colourful around Parramatta Leagues Club after the victory over the Cowboys. But it wasn't a crowd heading to the stadium for that. And probably match day, that opening day of CommBank Stadium against the West Tigers, that was probably one of the best days in terms of a Parramatta crowd at a Parramatta game, a home game. But, man, look, I don't think I can do it justice in the description of what I saw down there, because O'Connell Street was something else. I mean, all the surrounding streets was something else, with the Samoan fans that were coming in. Gee, I tell you what, Santa Claus outfits must have been in high demand from some of the costume shops, because there were plenty of people that were in them. But the people that were hanging out of cars, the flags, the yahooing, just the honking of the horns, and it was just a sea of red streaming towards the stadium. It was, look, you'd have to say that the emergence of a Pacific team like Tonga, and, to be fair as well, the last World Cup, it was Samoa that really shook things up in getting through to the final. But what Samoa has brought has been something else. It's really given an extra dimension to international rugby league. And you'd have to say that the Pacific Championships have been a success because, the ratings went through the roof for a start. There's the appetite for the rugby league at the end of the season. You think, okay, grand final's over. We don't do kangaroo tours to England anymore at the end of the season.
It's a longer regular season than ever as well, so you'd think that fatigue would be a factor for the fans, but nope.
Nope. And it was, and I think it's something new in terms of seeing the form of the Pacific teams and the passion of their fans for the game as well. That's, as I said, it feels like it's reignited or reinvigorated, maybe is a better word, the international rugby league. So, that the scenes down there, and I know plenty of people who were in the stadium were talking about what it was like to be there in person. The sound that was coming through in the broadcast was something else, especially when they launched into singing.
Yep.
The hymns that were being sung in the stadium by the Tongan fans. And but yeah, let's now talk about the games. And we'll start off with covering now the women's results. And there weren't really any surprises. I think we didn't have to do too much in terms of understanding the game to tip what the results would be. So we had a pretty strong win to the Samoan team over the PNG team in the final crossover game in the women's. So Samoa winning 34-12 there. That we talked about in our preview, John, that this PNG team is really going through the hard yards that the men's team went through a number of years ago, and they're a few years away from really getting towards where they want to be as an international women's team. And in the final of the Pacific Cup, the Jillaroos, the Australian team, were too strong for the Kiwi Ferns, 24-4. And
it was pretty much a shutout too. There was a late try to Leanne Tafanga that got the Kiwi Ferns on the board. And we sort of, you've been very bullish on the Roos the entire time, and I was a little bit more open towards New Zealand, at least initially, being a bit more competitive. But this really was not a victory lap, because that's too dismissive of the efforts of the Silver Ferns, but the culmination of just how dominant the Jillaroos have been for ever since they lost to the Kiwi Ferns. What is it, like 16 games ago now? They're on like a 15 or 16 game win streak now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, look, the development that's happened within the NRLW, and I think New Zealand, although there are plenty of Kiwi players that are playing in the NRLW, I think the loss of the Warriors team in the NRLW was significant.
Yep.
But that Australian team, as we talked about in all the previews, I just found it impossible to consider that any other international team was capable of matching it with the players that were taking the field for Australia. And as we said, there was still plenty of players for Australia that could consider themselves unlucky to not be selected. There were players that arguably could have made them stronger, but they are such a formidable team, just superstars all over the field. It was impossible to think that another team was going to get within cooey of them, and really that's how it panned out in the Pacific Championships. Anything you'd like to add to that, John?
No, like in terms of the ladies' game, I think the girls feel like they're in a similar place where the men were. I want to say circa 2005, up until, was it 2008, where the Kiwis shocked the Aussies in the World Cup, and that was sort of it felt like a big turning point internationally. So getting the Warriors franchise back in the NRW obviously be big there, and then for the on the other side in the what do they call this game? The playing game, for the Kiwis and the Kumals.
You're talking about in the men's?
Yeah, jumping to that, sort of like just segueing for New Zealand football, I suppose.
So that was that qualifying game to be one of the three teams in the Pacific Championship. Yeah. So they've called it the crossover.
The crossover, you're not playing game. I'm thinking of NBA and NFL here. It's funny because in the women's, New Zealand just need that domestic franchise, like you said, to just build a core of a squad to take it to the Aussies. And then here, the Kiwis, it was the opposite, where they had their core of a squad ripped out via injury, but were just too good for the Kumals. And this is what we tipped pretty much. The Kumals have been so spirited for the international run here, but the Kiwis are a class above even for all the players they were missing, and ended up being a real shellacking.
Yeah, and look, the interesting thing for me, John, and I have to think, I haven't seen or I didn't try to look up any reasoning for the scheduling with this game following the Kangaroos and Tonga match. You would have thought that it would have been a lead-up game rather than the game to follow. So, yeah, I have to think it's a broadcast issue with that.
Those sort of things you usually put down to a broadcast, sort of.
Yeah, because it's disappointing to see that they're barely playing in front of anyone, that the stadium is emptied out for the final game of the day, and whereas they could have been part of the build-up, and and I'm sure the players would have preferred to play in front of more people, but yeah, it was a major class difference between the teams, and whereas the Kummels will get that job done against some of the other Pacific nations, and arguably they might struggle against Tonga now, or may very well do so. It's this was just a task that was too much to get near the Kiwis, and of course that game then that we have to talk about, the Kangaroos and Tonga. I'll put my hand up and say it ended up a bit closer than what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a good game, but I didn't think it would quite get that close.
I think I called this in the 6 to 8 point margin if the Tongans didn't let the emotions of the moment conquer them.
Yes,
and that's
we did spend a bit of time talking about not getting overwhelmed by the emotions,
and they harnessed their emotions perfectly, didn't they? They were in this up to their eyeballs. Late try to Elias Katoa put them within striking distance, but they couldn't quite convert it to take the game to the golden point. Really, really fun game, this one. And look, I think that the Aussies, again, probably weren't at their best. It felt like spine-wise, the connection wasn't great this game. I think Mitchell Moses probably wasn't at his best, and that's more of a reflection of his physical status coming back from the injury. But to his credit, I think he did a great job realising that he wasn't killing the game. So just step back, take over all the sort of management responsibilities, and let Tom Dearden be the star of the game. And that's what he did, and Dearden killed it. And in saying that, Tom Trbojevic, the score was 6 points, but Tom Trbojevic butchered a couple of tries, didn't he, Sixties? That could have made the game a little bit more convincing for the Aussies in the first half. But really, really fun clash. The Tongans just brought it. They had their own injuries in this game too. I think they had, Cooler came into the team, and then was he knocked out of the game? And then Katoa, I think Sione Katoa had some concerns in this one. So they were juggling injuries in this game and still managed to stay ultra competitive. And given that they had the King and Prince of Tonga in attendance, they certainly turned up for their country. This was a fun game though. Just the Tongans refused to go away, and they asked a lot of questions of the Aussies, who weren't playing bad football, but were definitely challenged physically by the Tongans. And that's the big thing when you can. It's funny because it's obviously not the same in a pure moral standpoint, but these games, international rugby league, it's like standing up to the bully and clocking him in the jaw, isn't it? The Aussies and the Kiwis, they are the bullies internationally, England too, just because they've got decades and decades and decades of international seasoning and the cream of the crop players. And so when Tonga and Samoa and all the other smaller nations stand up and deck them in the face and deliver a bit of physicality back, it really opens up the game a bit. And sort of the Aussies they don't go into a shell, but they sort of, they're quicker to go away from things that work, I think, than they otherwise would be, where they can just go through their systems and put a stranglehold in the game. And when Tonga and Samoa stand up like that, it opens up the game in different ways and makes it a really fascinating contest.
It does. And, of course, what we have to remember as well is that in these contests, it is possible to rise above what a lot of people might be expecting in terms of performance, because they're like 1 or 2 games, maybe 3 games in a 3-game series, like Origin football, right? So it's not like a grind of 25, 26 matches of a season where you cannot possibly stay up as these players are in these international matches. And you just described Tonga as playing off the emotion perfectly in this game. So they really rose to the occasion. And I think Australia, it was almost like a combination of playing within themselves and also not quite clicking. I don't think the attack ever clicked in this series. Now, we raised what might be a controversial opinion last week where we discussed, is it a case of Harry Grant maybe not being that team player as a dummy half? He is a brilliant dummy half. He will do things that other dummy halves can't do. But I would suggest that his service sometimes is not elite level. There are, like, even in this game, there were a couple of passes. I think there was one in particular that was meant to go to Dylan Edwards, but it was spiraling away from him. And he ended up he knocked on, but he could barely get his hand to the ball, to be fair to him. And I just thought there were a couple of times where, and it's not even a matter of, is he going to the right side or the wrong side? It's a matter of, look, the pass just isn't up to standard a few times during the game. And I just thought, they're a bit disjointed. Just a bit disjointed. No doubt Dearden was outstanding in this game. Probably one of the best games that I've ever seen him play. And if anything, Australia seemed to favour going out that side of the field. And there wasn't too much that was expected of Mitch Moses in attack because the ball didn't go to that side of the field as much as it went to the other side of the field. But that can be dictated by when the coach is looking at where they want to attack the opposition. Well, if it's down the side of the field where that particular half is, they're going to see a bit more than the other half.
Yep.
So it doesn't mean the halves can't link, because there was the play where I think it was quite a good play where Moses and Dearden linked, and was the try allowed or disallowed? I'm thinking maybe it was disallowed. But anyway.
Oh yeah, that one was disallowed, I believe. Yeah, I think it came back.
Yeah. So look, Australia got the job done. It wasn't ultra convincing, but probably the thing that Australia can feel proud about through this series is their defence. I think their defence was really top notch throughout the series, but attack left a little bit to be desired. They looked really rusty in the first game, looked a bit better in their second game, but in this final, had their moments again of looking rusty and not as much cohesion in the team. So, but all in all, mate, what do you say? The Pacific Championship's a big tick of approval?
Yeah, I was invested in it more than I thought I would. I think up until the end day schedule, I don't think there was any real gripes about anything else. I thought it was all handled pretty well. I liked going to Suva and going to Port Moresby and sort of taking the game international there. Like you sort of intimated, I think maybe it was a scheduling thing for the broadcasters, but you'd like to see the NRL and International Rugby League sort of flex a little bit more on that and get a conventional championship schedule there. But yeah, otherwise than that, sad that New Zealand was so hit by injury. That obviously shaped the complex of the tournament a fair bit, but love seeing Tonga rise up to the occasion. And then, aside from that, getting the Warriors back in the ladies' side will help immensely with New Zealand's consistency on the international stage. And beyond that, big tick of approval.
Mate, just before we wrap up, first of all, I think the other tick of approval was staging the final day at CommBank Stadium.
Yeah, that fits so perfectly for Tonga, didn't it? It works so well.
Yeah, and ideal stadium size for this, so you get the full house that's there. If you're playing in the 60,000 or 80,000 seat stadium. Maybe it's not a sellout. It doesn't look as good with some empty seats that are there, and arguable that they might have been able to sell out the new Sydney stadium, but and squeezed in another 12,000. But look, it was great. Western Sydney. There's a lot of our Tongan friends.
Demographically, it just fits so well, doesn't it, for the Tongan part of rugby league there in Australia?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, a question that I postulated on X on Twitter. Yeah, it feels strange calling it X.
It's Twitter. Elon can tell us it's X. It's Twitter.
Yeah. So on Twitter, I suggested at some point in the future, with NRL expansion, could a inverted commas Tongan team be part of the NRL? And what I suggested was that they be, just as New Zealand is the New Zealand Warriors, they could be the Tongan whoever, and that they actually base themselves in New Zealand, play a couple of games a season in Tonga itself, but in terms of facilities, revenue, all that sort of stuff, that New Zealand would be the base. Without question, they would have a support base in New Zealand. We've seen the Tongan
the red combating with the black in New Zealand.
Yeah. So they would get the crowds to their home games that are in New Zealand, but when they're travelling to Australia, they're going to draw these sorts of crowds, you would think. And maybe it's not the national team, so there might be a little bit of a difference, and some Tongan fans are arguably fans of other NRL clubs when it comes to the grind of NRL Premiership football. But I don't think it's outside of the realms of a possibility in terms of game growth that would be the way to go. You couldn't base a Pacific Nations team in one of the islands. It just wouldn't have the commercial viability, you wouldn't think. But you could play a couple of games there and you take it to where their people are. And as we saw on the weekend, as we've seen in games in New Zealand, there are plenty of Tongan people in both countries, and I think that they would be a team which would fill stadiums no matter where they played. So just a thought that's out there that I put out there. A few people agreed. Some people said, well, no, it's if you base a team in New Zealand, it's not a Tongan team. Well, I argued if you base South Sydney in the western suburbs, are they not still South Sydney? So I know it's a bit different with different countries as opposed to different locations in the Sydney region. But anyway, just a thought that I've thrown out there. Maybe people have got some opinions on that they want to add into the comments on the post for our podcast. So, John, I think that just about wraps up this podcast. How did we come in time-wise?
Hour 38. The Pacific Championships sort of ran it out a little bit at the end, but solid podcast.
I think it tends to be the standard that we're coming in at, that hour and a half mark for the once-a-week news podcast. Of course, we'll continue our once-a-week news podcast throughout the pre-season, and then when the season kicks off, the season proper in 2025, we'll be back to the 3-podcast schedule of the news, the preview, and then the instant reaction. So obviously looking forward to that down the track. But for now, we're sticking with the one podcast per week. So again, thank you to our sponsors, Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Thank you to everyone who's been listening to the podcast. And to all those people who give us feedback about how much they enjoy the podcast, we really appreciate that. It makes us feel good about what we're doing. And so thank you very much to those people. Again, if you haven't voted for the Parramatta Leagues Club EGM, please make sure you vote. Voting closes on Monday at 5 p.m. And we voted against the resolutions. So we urge other people to vote against the resolutions as well and ensure that the fine directors of the Parramatta Leagues Club are allowed to continue to do the terrific job that they are doing for the club and taking it into the future. And John, as I always say, go you mighty Eels.